4:30, and since this is one of the relaxed sessions where I'm chairing myself, I'll get started. I'd like to start with some introductions. I'm Alex Lloyd, I'm the German tutor at the Hall and also at Magdalen College, and I'm ably assisted by Dr Birgit Mikus, who teaches our students, our second year and final students, for prose translation. I should also introduce, I'm keeping us in the family just as Lucy did this morning. The piano will be ably played by Dr Lloyd, who happens to be my husband. 2014 is something of a remembrance year in Germany. It's 300 years since the Hanoverian accession. It's 100 years since the outbreak of World War I. It's 75 years since the outbreak of World War II, and 25 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall. When Lucy announced that the Writers' Forum would be commemorating at least one of those events, I thought it would be a good opportunity to explore some of the responses to the war in literature, and specifically in German literature. And in our discussions about some of the texts we can include and about the kind of form that this session might take, we came across some texts and some songs which some of them were well known, some of them perhaps less well known, certainly in the English-speaking context. Some of them were totally new to us and quite exciting to find. The texts that we'll be presenting are German language texts, and I say that because, of course, we're not just talking about Germany, we're talking about German-speaking lands, so Austria-Hungary, Switzerland, and we would like to present some of these perspectives to you this evening. It seems particularly important, given that English World War I poetry, Wilfred Owen, Siegfried Sassoon, Rupert Brooke, and so on, is such a kind of common cultural currency. And we thought it would be interesting just to bring some of these German perspectives out today. So, our session is, as a result, located somewhere between an academic paper and a cabaret performance, which we hope you'll forgive or enjoy as it takes you. Now, since not everyone can be expected to speak German, which is, of course, a lamentable state of affairs, we will be reading German texts in German, but also in translation. And some of these translations have been written by our current students. And they're here, some of them today, to read, and I'm very grateful for their enthusiasm and their commitment and their willingness to be coerced. So we held a translation workshop a few weeks ago where we looked at some of these texts. Students have worked on them independently of their own volition. Some have been hybrid versions formed of students' work and our work, and it will be interesting to see if you can ever tell the difference. So at the end of the talk, we'd like to invite questions, but perhaps in a more informal way. Perhaps we could channel the cabaret aspect rather than the academic paper aspect, given that Birgit is more of a 19th century specialist and I'm more of a 21st century specialist. We meet in the middle, I think. So please do ask us questions at the end if you'd like to. We've also put together some materials, some books and flyers and magazines related to Germany, the First World War and literature. So please do come and have a look, and we hope you enjoy our little offering. The declaration of war in 1914 was heralded in many literary quarters as a moment of opportunity. There was a widespread sense that it might offer an aesthetic revitalisation. Commentary on the war can be found from a number of sources, and positive responses on the part of writers came thick and fast. Thomas Mann, of whom we heard in David Priestman's talk this morning, declared in the summer of 1914 how the hearts of all poets were on fire when war came. It was a cleansing, a release that we experienced, an incredible sense of hope. There were, of course, also dissenting voices, or at least some more ambivalent voices. In Vienna, Sigmund Freud commented in a letter to the Russian psychoanalyst and author Lou Andreas Salome in November 1914, "I know that science appears to be dead, but humanity seems really to be dead." 300 miles away and 3 months earlier in Prague, Franz Kafka was twice conscripted and eventually excused from military service, partly due to his poor health, and partly because of essential work at home. He appears to have greeted the war with some resignation. He simply recorded in his diary entry from the 2nd of August 1914, Germany has declared war on Russia. Afternoon, swimming lesson. The initial euphoria which came with the outbreak of war was reflected in the huge number of pro-war poems which were printed in magazines, newspapers, periodicals, and so on. They were also collected in anthologies, and the literary critic and poet Julius Babb collected such poems and compiled a 12-volume collection of war poetry between 1914 and 18, and we have some of the issues here today. It was a bestseller. Babb estimated that in the early months of the war, a vast amount of poetry was being produced. The Berlin Daily, the Berliner Tageszeitung, for example, is estimated to have been sent 500 poems per day in August 1914. Of course, it didn't print them all. Babb suggests that some 50,000 poems were being written per day in the early months of the war, of which only a small amount made it into print. By 1916, around 450 anthologies of verse had been published. This constituted a kind of lyric call to arms, or as Patrick Bridgewater has put it, a poetic mobilisation. Volume 2 of Babb's anthology includes one of the most famous examples of a pro-war poem, the German poet Ernst Lissauer's Hassgesang gegen England, Song of Hate against England, a rather less playful counterpart to Noel Coward's later song, Don't Let's Be Beastly to the Germans. Lissauer's vitriolic poem exhorts its reader to hatred against England. France and Russia presented as somewhat ineffectual and insignificant opponents, and certainly not worthy of the Germans' hatred. The poem was widely disseminated, particularly among soldiers, and Lissauer was awarded the Order of the Red Eagle 4th Class for his contribution to the war. Volume 1 of Babb's anthology includes a poem from August 1914, written by Wilhelm Platz, which is marked to be sung to the tune of O Tannenbaum, which we know as O Christmas Tree. The poem also appears to have been printed in a school textbook of the period, in order, presumably, to inculcate patriotic feelings amongst the next generation of soldiers. The poem begins with a pun on Nikolaus, referring to St Nicholas, whose feast day is still widely kept in Germany on the 6th of December, and of course Tsar Nicholas of Russia. The poet's attention then turns to the English, using the address one might use to scold a particularly naughty child who hasn't been good this year. And finally, the poet addresses the Frenchman, der Franzmann, using the colloquial and derogative form, the equivalent of Tommy or Hun. So Esther and Sophie are going to read the poem for us, and then I'm going to give you the musical version.
This is O Nikolaus. O Nikolaus, du bist ein schlechter Bruder. Du predigst uns von Frieden vor und rüstest heimlich Chor um Chor. O Nikolaus, du bist ein falscher Luder.
O Nicholas, you are a dreadful crony. You preached us peace, and then you went and slyly armed your regiments. O Nicholas, oh what a lying phony.
O England, wie hast du dich benommen? Als wie ein schlechter Krämes Mann, der nimmt so oft und viel er kann. O England, das wird dir schlecht bekommen.
O England, this year you have been horrid. Just like an awful hawker who takes all he can, leaves none for you. O England, you surely will pay for it.
Der Franzmann auch, weiß wieder seine Krallen. Möchte gern den schönen Rhein, wir aber nach Paris hinein. Das will ihm nicht gefallen.
The Frenchman too, he bears his teeth and claws. He wants our Rhine to call his own, but soon we'll all call Paris home. The Frenchman too, he won't like that at all.
Du bist ein schlechter Bruder, oh guter Kamerad, the good comrade, was extremely popular. This can be seen in a number of rather kitsch postcards of the period of which this is an example. The speaker in this song recalls the experience of war and the face of his dearest comrade who is shot. The speaker must choose whether to reach out to his dying comrade who stretches out his hand to him, or to reload his gun and to fight on. Sophie and Markus are going to read Sophie and Markus are going to read, and then again I'm going to give you the musical rendition.
Okay, so I'm going to do the German part. So for those of you who are natives, excuse my accent. So I hope it's still recognizable. So, ich hatte einen Kameraden, einen besseren findest du nicht. Die Trommel schlug zum Streite, er ging an meiner Seite, im gleichen Schritt und Tritt.
I once had a comrade, you won't find one better. The drum struck up, ready for battle. He marched beside me, keeping pace with me.
Eine Kugel kam und geflogen, gilt's mir oder gilt es dir? Ihn hat es weggerissen, er fliegt zu meinen Füßen, als wär's ein Stück von mir.
A bullet flew towards us. Will it hit you or me? It tore through him. He lies at my feet, as though he were part of me.
Will mir die Hand noch reichen, derweil ich eben lad? Kann dir die Hand nicht geben, bleib du im ewigen Leben, mein guter Kamerad.
He wants to reach out to me. I'm just reloading my rifle. I can't give you my hand. Rest in eternal life, my good comrade.
Both in its original form and in parody versions. A more pacifist rendition, for example, offers the following version. I once had a comrade, you won't find a worse one, not a better one. The drum strikes up, ready for battle, he sneaks away and says, I'm not doing that. Another adaptation, parody version from 1917, plays on the soldiers' hunger at the front. I once had some marmalade. Marmelade, Kamerad, it's great. You won't find anything better. Marmalade sits and churns in your stomach into crying shame, and so on and so forth. The experience of the front line is a theme also of much post-1918 writing in German, particularly novels of which several appeared in the 1920s. One of the earliest post-war accounts published in 1920 was Ernst Jünger's In Stahlgewittern, Storm of Steel, which offers a graphic account of the front line. Junger survived the war despite suffering extensive wounds when the military hospital in which he was being treated was bombed, thus wounding him further. He passed away in 1998 at the age of 102. He reworked the text, Storm of Steel, multiple times, and the critic Stanley Korngold credits its influence, for example, on Thomas Mann's 1924 novel Der Zauberberg, The Magic Mountain. Erich Marie Remarque's In Westen nichts Neues, All Quiet on the Western Front, which I'm told is occasionally mistaken for an English text, is surely the best known novel in German of the war and certainly very well known in this country. Indeed, some of Remarque's novels were originally published in English, not German. A year after its publication, All Quiet on the Western Front had sold 1 million copies. However, its pacifist message did not find favour with the National Socialists, and when the film adaptation premiered in 1930 in December in Berlin, the performance was reportedly disrupted by brown shirts who released stink bombs and mice in the cinema auditorium. 3 years later, the book was banned and burned, in contrast to Junger's Storm of Steel, which was applauded by the Nazis and declared by Joseph Goebbels to be the German book of the war. All Quiet on the Western Front provides vivid descriptions of war from the German perspective. The critic Brian Murdoch suggests that Remarque's novel is narrated from the frog perspective, which is a translation of the German aus der Froschperspektive, which we would normally translate from a worm's eye view. But he persists in this idea of a frog perspective. He has a point. For Murdoch, the latter does not sufficiently convey the full and rich character of this narrative viewpoint. Another striking aspect of the perspective in All Quiet on the Western Front is its universality. The protagonist and narrator, Paul Bäumer, identified strongly with French and Russian soldiers whom he knows he ought to view as his enemy. The text accuses not the enemy, but rather the military and political elite who have brought the war upon ordinary soldiers like him. Remarque also focuses on the difficulty of reconciling experiences in the trenches with the life at home. The book's preface, after all, indicates that it is an attempt to report on a generation who were destroyed by war, even if they escaped the grenades, even if they survived. In 1929, the same year that All Quiet on the Western Front was published, 2 novels by the little-known author Ernst Johansen appeared. While Remarque offers a frog's perspective, Johansen gives an account of the war through the eyes of a young mare. Fronterinnerungen eines Pferdes, Frontline Memories of a Horse, was dedicated to the 958,600 horses who fell during the conflict. It bears comparison, of course, with Michael Morpurgo's 1982 novel War Horse, now a major film and extremely successful stage adaptation. Like Morpurgo's equine narrator Joey, Johansen's narrator Lisa gives a naive perspective on the war. She's a new recruit, as it were. She doesn't understand the reasons behind the war, and the human's behaviour startles and later appalls her. While novels after the war give a retrospective account of the front line, vast output of literature appeared written at the time by those who were fighting and coming to terms with what that meant. In Oxford, the modern language faculty, based in the Taylor Institute on St Giles, continued to teach modern languages, including German, although naturally most of the male students disappeared. In 1915, for example, 9 men sat the final honours school in modern languages in order to complete their degrees before going to the front. 12 women took the exams. By contrast, in 1918, 3 men sat the final honours school, while it was simultaneously taken by 14 women. In his 1929 History of the Taylorian, Charles Firth describes that in 1916 a committee was commissioned with the task of assessing modern language teaching provision in Britain. The report, which was submitted in April 1918, reported in Firth's words that the war had made people conscious of how little is known about foreign countries. Ignorance of the mental attitude and aspirations of the German people may not have been the cause of the war, but it certainly prevented due preparation and hampered our efforts after the war had begun. Clearly, it's very much of its time, but strikingly, between 1920 and 28, more than double, almost a third more students were registered for the final honours school than had been in the pre-war period. So clearly this had some effect. A short cycle journey away, at Magdalen College, the expressionist poet Ed Stadler who was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford and wrote a thesis on Shakespeare translations, was active. He gained a professorship in Toronto, but was killed at the front, having been called up in 1914. A plaque outside the chapel commemorates him, and a memorial service was in fact arranged for him in 1994. Strikingly, amongst the settings of his poetry and hymns that were sung at the service, Uhlands Ich hatte einen Kameraden, I once had a comrade, was sung as the final piece. In a recent article in The Guardian, Philip Alterman writes that a friend of Stadler's at Magdalen remembered that although Stadler had, quote, no enthusiasm for rowing and got into trouble with his tutors for missing his thesis deadline, he had never known a German so easy to get on with. Stadler's diary is currently on display in the Bodleian's exhibition, The Great War, Personal Stories from Downing Street to the Trenches. The Austrian expressionist poet Georg Trakl, of the same generation, is recognised as one of the most important lyric voices of the early 20th century, and his works frequently defy interpretation. His poems were published by Ludwig von Vicker, who edited the significant literary journal Der Brenner, and he was eventually published by Kurt Wolf, who was Kafka's publisher, who brought out a volume of Trakl's poems in 1913. Trakl was deployed as a medical officer in Galicia in 1914. His last poem, Grodek, is named after the site of the Battle of Grodek, which took place in September 1914 and was one of the greatest battles on the Eastern Front at the beginning of the war. Trakl was deeply traumatised by his experiences. He was put in charge of 90 wounded soldiers, one of whom tried to shoot himself. Trakl, his nerves shattered, was hospitalised and died of cocaine overdose, which may or may not have been intentional, in November 1914. His final poem attests to the horrors of war, but it does so by invoking a more distant, primordial scene of a landscape marred by an angry god. He maintains a tension between images of nature, forests, plains, meadows, and the destruction wrought by this malevolent force. The soldiers, shattered by their experience, are described using the more ancient term warriors, evoking a pre-modern yet somehow also timeless context. This poem will be read in German and then in English. It's been translated by Walker Thompson, but will be read by Delilah Fawcett.
Grodek. Am Abend tönen die herbstlichen Wälder von tödlichen Waffen, die goldenen Ebenen und blauen Seen, darüber die Sonne düsterer hinrollt. Umfängt die Nacht sterbende Krieger, die wilde Klage ihrer zerbrochenen Münder. Doch Stille sammelt im Weidengrund rotes Gewölk, darin ein zürnender Gott wohnt. Das vergossene Blut sich mondne Kühle, alle Straßen münden in schwarze Verwesung. Unter goldenem Gezweig der Nacht und Sternen, es schwankt der Schwester Schatten durch den schweigenden Hain. Zu grüßen die Geister der Helden, die blutenden Häupter. Und leise tönen im Rohr die dunklen Flöten des Herbstes. O stolzre Trauer, ihr ehernen Altäre! Die heiße Flamme des Geistes nährt heute ein gewaltiger Schmerz, die ungeborenen Enkel.
At nightfall, the autumnal forests resound with deadly weapons, the golden plains and blue lakes above which the sun rolls more darkly. The night embraces dying warriors, with wild lament of their shattered mouths. But there gathers silently on the meadowland a mass of red clouds, in which a wrathful god dwells, the spilt blood, the moonlit coolness. All roads empty out into black putrefaction. Beneath the golden canopy of the night and stars, the sister's shadow staggers through the silent grove to salute the spirits of heroes, their bleeding heads. And softly the dark flutes of autumn resound amidst the reeds. O prouder grief, ye brazen altars, the hot flame of the spirit is fed today by violent grandchildren unborn.
Amongst the anti-war voices from home was that of Frank Wiedekind, who initially showed support for the war but later reassessed his position. The first years know him because he wrote Spring Awakening, which is one of their set of In the following song, Diplomats, Wedekind launches a satirical attack on those responsible for the war, namely those involved in international diplomacy. Wedekind set it to music, although there was little chance of it being performed, and it was not published. Written in either 1916 or 17, it notes that even the corpses in the graves are no longer spared by the guns. The poem is a bitter exploration of the idea that diplomats have treated the warring nations and their soldiers as pawns, and that even when peace does come, it will not suit everyone. The dramatist and poet Berthold Brecht acknowledged the influence of Frank Wedekind on his songs, and that's certainly discernible here. Instrumental in achieving women's suffrage, which she saw realised in 1919 at the age of 88, just months before her death. Dawn was a pacifist and opposed the German women's movement's support of militarism. Her short piece, If I Were a Zealot Patriot, was first published in the 1916 collection Das Land Goethes, 1914 to 1916, so Goethe's Country, ein Vaterländisches Gedenkbuch, a memorial book for the fatherland. This was compiled to raise money for German libraries and to exhibit the values of German culture, thus refuting the image of the barbaric German suggested by its enemies. Dawn's text was reprinted in 2006 in the new edition of her collected works, which is currently in progress. To the best of our knowledge, it has never previously been translated. In this text, translated and read for us today by Jennifer Shaw, Dawn pours scorn over various institutions and attitudes in Germany and the institutions which glorify death. She employs a combination of high and low register language here, as well as repetition and religious references. Her use of the subjunctive, if I were a zealous patriot, recurs throughout the passage until her final claim, in which she asserts her own firmly rooted position.
Wäre ich ein glühender Patriot, es zu sein, heischt der Geist der Zeit, in meiner Seele würden Psalter und Harfe erwachen, und ich sänge dem Heroentum des deutschen Volkes ein hohes Lied. Wäre ich ein Held der Feder, ich sage nicht Zeitungsschreiber, welchen Ranges und welcher Partei auch immer, von Heiligkeiten würden meine Kriegsbetrachtungen strahlend strotzen. Heilig, heilig der Krieg, heilig die Schlacht, heilig die Seligkeit des Sterbens auf dem Feld der Ehre, heilig der Feindeshass. Gottes Donner hörte ich aus den Kanonen brüllen, Und anstatt der dunklen Taube, der bombenwerfenden, Menschenleiber zerreißenden, sähe ich nur die weiße Taube, das Symbol der Ausgießung eines Heiligen Geistes. Nach der Taube mit dem Ölzweig spähe ich vergebens aus. Wäre ich ein Fatalist, ich spräche, es ist die Bestimmung der Völker, sich von Zeit zu Zeit gegenseitig zu vernichten. Wäre ich der Teufel, ich täte lachen, lachen in wollüstiger Schadenfreude, jauchzend über den Sieg, den die Hölle errungen. Wäre ich der liebe Gott, ich beauftragte Petrus, meinen Pförtner, allen Kriegsanstiftern, Kriegshetzern, Kriegsbrünstigen und Kriegsliebenden die Himmelspforte zu sperren, mit dem Donnerwort, Unbefugten ist der Eingang nicht gestattet. Bin ich ein Mensch? Nichts als ein Mensch. Ich müsste ob dieses Krieges weinen, weinen, bis meine Augen vor Tränen blind geworden.
If I were a zealous patriot, for this is the duty of our time, psalters and harps would strike up in my soul, and I would sing a hymn of praise to the heroism of the German nation. If I were a champion of the quill, I do not mean merely writing for some rag. Regardless of rank or party, my war reports would teem with glorious praises. O holy, holy war, O holy slaughter, O holy sanctity of death on the field of honour, O holy hatred of an unknown foe. I would hear divine thunder roaring from the cannons, and instead of that dark dove, which drops bombs and rips human flesh apart, I would see only the white dove, the manifestation of some Holy Spirit. I search in vain for the dove which bears the olive branch. If I were a fatalist, I would say, it is the fate of nations to annihilate each other from time to time. If I were the devil, I would laugh in joyful pleasure at the woes of men, hooting at the victory hell has won. If I were the dear Lord himself, I would instruct Peter, my gatekeeper, to bar the gates of heaven to all warmongers, to all those who incite to, lust after, or revel in war, with the thunderous words, no trespassing. If I am a human being, nothing more than a human being, I would be forced to weep over this war, until my eyes have been blinded by the tears.
Letters and diaries testify to the suffering and loss of those who remained at home. The Neue Wache in Berlin was turned into a memorial for those who died in the First World War and was rededicated after the fall of the Berlin Wall to commemorate all victims of war and tyranny. The statue of a grieving mother with her dead son was installed in the early 1990s and is a replica of a piece by the artist Peter Kollwitz. Both her sons, Peter and Hans, went to the front. While Hans survived the war, married and had children, Peter survived less than a week and died on the 23rd of October 1914, aged 18. Kollwitz's diaries are a testament to the pain and anguish and loneliness she felt after his death. Kollwitz never recovered, really, from the grief of Peter's death, and her diaries record the ongoing struggle with her loss. She dreams that he's still alive, she addresses him directly. The memorial which she mentions in that last diary entry took her 20 years to complete. Entitled Das trauernde Elternpaar, the grieving parents, it was erected in the German war cemetery in Roggevelde in Flanders, where Peter had been buried. When Peter's grave was relocated to Władysław War Cemetery, the statues were moved, and Peter's grave lies just before them. Kollwitz was persecuted by the Nazis and died in April 1945, having outlived her husband, been stripped of her professorship, and witnessed the death or lived through the death of her grandson, Peter, who was killed on the Eastern Front in 1942. To, as it were, conclude. The legacy of the First World War in Germany is, I think, profoundly different, of course, to that of Britain. The end of the war meant defeat, the Peace Treaty of Versailles, and as has already been pointed out today, the origins of the next worldwide military conflict. As I've said, many war novels were published in the Weimar Republic, some lauded by the National Socialists, some banned and burned. In our final poem, Kurt Tucholsky's Krieg den Krieger, War on War, there's a reference to the possibility of another future war, a reference which seems almost prophetic, given that he writes the following: in 20 years' time, when new cannons will be ready to carry out crimes. Tucholsky, who died in 1935, would not live to see that war, which was unsurprisingly and has unsurprisingly dominated Germany's cultural and national memory. We'll follow the poem with one last song, Mein Michel, a folk song which was passed on by word of mouth during the war because of its satirical content, which openly criticises the war. It addresses Michel, a long-standing personification of the German people, who is asked again and again, Michel, what more could you want? And the song asks the question, but it does not provide an answer.
Krieg dem Kriege. Sie lagen 4 Jahre im Schützengraben. Zeit, große Zeit. Sie froren und waren verlaust und haben daheim eine Frau und 2 kleine Knaben. Weit, weit. Und keiner, der ihnen die Wahrheit sagt. Und keiner, der aufzubegehren wagt. Monat um Monat, Jahr um Jahr. Und wenn mal einer auf Urlaub war, sah er zu Hause die dicken Bäuche. Und es fraßen dort um sich wie eine Seuche, der Tanz, die Gier, das Schiebergeschäft. Und die Horde alldeutscher Skribenten kläfft: Krieg, Krieg, großer Sieg, Sieg in Albanien und Sieg in Flandern. Und es starben die anderen, die anderen, die anderen. Sie sahen die Kameraden fallen, das war das Schicksal bei fast allen. Verwundung, Qual wie ein Tier und Tod. Ein kleiner Fleck, schmutzig rot, und man trug sie fort und scharrte sie ein. Wer wird wohl der Nächste sein? Und ein Schrei von Millionen stieg auf zu den Sternen. Werden die Menschen es niemals lernen? Gibt es ein Ding, um das es sich lohnt? Wer ist das, der da oben thront? Von oben bis unten bespickt mit Orden und nur immer befiehlt: Morden, Morden. Blut und zermalmte Knochen und Dreck. Und dann hieß es plötzlich, das Schiff sei leck. Der Kapitän hat den Abschied genommen und ist etwas plötzlich von dannen geschwommen. Ratlos stehen die Feldgrauen da. Für wen das alles? Pro Patria? Brüder, Brüder, schließt die Reihen. Brüder, das darf nicht wieder sein. Geben Sie uns den Vernichtungsfrieden, ist das gleiche Los beschieden, unseren Söhnen und euren Enkeln. Sollen die wieder blutrot besprenkeln, die Ackergräben, das grüne Gras? Brüder, pfeift den Burschen was! Es darf und soll so nicht weitergehen. Wir haben alle gesehen, wohin ein solcher Wahnsinn führt. Das Feuer brannte, das sie geschürt. Löscht es aus! Die Imperialisten, die da drüben bei jenen nisten, schenken uns wieder Nationalisten. Und nach abermals 20 Jahren kommen neue Kanonen gefahren. Das wäre kein Friede, das wäre Wahn. Der alte Tanz auf dem alten Vulkan. Du sollst nicht töten, hat einer gesagt. Und die Menschheit hört's und die Menschheit klagt. Will das niemals anders werden? Krieg dem Kriege und Friede auf Erden.
War on war. They lay for 4 years in the dirt of the trenches, time of their lives. They froze to death and were ridden with lice, with a wife and their 2 little boys back at home, far, far away. And no one to tell them the truth of it all, and no one who dared to champion their cause, month after month, year after year. And when one of them went on leave for once, he looked at the bulging bellies back home, and the dance and greed and the criminal trade ate up everything just like a plague. And the masses of writers endlessly bark, war, war, a great victory, victories in both Albania and Flanders. And yet more troops died, yet more, yet more. They had to look on while their comrades fell. This was almost everyone's fate. Injury, anguish, torment, and death. One little blemish, dirty and red, and they were carried off and dug in with haste. One wonders who will be next. And a scream, wailed by millions, reached up to the stars. Will mankind ever learn? Is there one thing that is worth our while? Who is that there, up on the throne, decked out head to toe with medals and frills, and always commands us to kill and kill, blood and crushed bones and filthiest dirt? And suddenly they say that the ship sprung a leak. The captain has suddenly taken his leave, and has paddled away somewhat hastily. The officers look on perplexedly. All this, for whom? Pro patria? Brothers, my brothers, unite all men. Brothers, this should happen never again. If they deal us this disastrous peace, our sons and their sons in turn will once again fall prey to this fate. Shall their dear red blood have to mottle once again the fields, the trenches, the green, green grass? Brothers, don't be taken for a fool. This must not and shall not go on the way it has. We all have seen where this must lead, this madness like a blaze they have stoked. Extinguish it. Those imperialists who are nesting there on the opposite side will take us again on a nationalist ride. And once again, in 20 years' time, new cannons are ready to commit their crimes. That would not be peace. That would be delusion. The age-old dance on the powder keg. Thou shalt not kill, someone once said. And mankind hears it, and mankind moans. Will anyone ever atone? Declare war on war, and peace on earth.